I'm Jessie Olson, member of the Fitchburg Historical Society Board, and I'm here today with Bill Flynn, former mayor of Fitchburg from 1968 to 1971, and he was part of Fitchburg's history in that he was here for the opening of the Wallace Civic Center, part of regional planning, the cleanup of the Nashua River, and many other events in the 1960s, or the late 1960s. So thank you for doing this with us today.
Well, thank you. Happy to be here.
Yes. So you were the youngest mayor of Fitchburg, and there was quite a bit of excitement about your election. You started as a city council member, and what motivated you to want to become mayor?
Well, when you're on the city council and you want to see things happen, the next logical step is to go for the big job. And I saw a lot of activities going on that I felt that if we put a little bit more energy into them, a little bit more focus, we could start doing some pretty exciting stuff in Fitchburg. So that was basically it. I didn't have any long-term political objectives. It's just I was there, I was on the council. It looked like the time for me to move on or move up.
Now, even before you were on city council, had you always wanted to have a political career, or was it just something as growing up in Fitchburg you saw there were changes you wanted to make and that was the opportunity to do that?
No, I spent my youth as a political junkie. My father ran for city council several times. He wasn't successful, but I was involved in other people's campaigns, and frankly I got a little bit frustrated by the way the campaigns were going. It was sort of the old school approach back then, and I thought there were better ways of doing it, and that's why I ran for city council, to prove that, you know, if you went out and door to door, did the type of stuff that you really need to do to connect with the community, people would respond. So when I was 23, I hopped into the city council race at large. There were 18 candidates, and there were 5 seats available, 4 of them were incumbents. And I figured, well, I'll just use this as I'll show you that there is a better way of doing it. I did not expect to get elected, but I expected to get a good showing so that as I got more involved, people would say, well, he kind of has a technique that'll work. To my surprise, I came in second in the primary. So then I had no choice but to go all out to win it, because then I'd just be a flash in the pan if I lost. And so I won.
So you found that some of the techniques that you used were, like you said, being personal, going door to door. So
right.
Do you feel those are things that can still apply today?
Oh, you can see that's pressing the flesh. Tip O'Neill always said, you got to ask for the vote, and if you don't ask for it, we actually came up with stuff now that's pretty commonplace. Back then, it was 1966, the night that I was nominated in the preliminary election. I had a team, and we went out and we put thank you strips across all of the signs I had all over the city. And everybody woke up the next morning and wow, look at that. And since then, it's been sort of commonplace. People do that. So those some of the little, cute but effective techniques.
How many people helped you campaign?
Well, in the beginning, no one, but no, a lot of people. That was the other thing I found, that people come out of the woodwork literally to support a cause. And so in the city council race, you don't need that much of a campaign and so forth. You just need to go out and press the flesh and knock on the doors. In a mayor's race, you need more, but in that case, there were a lot of people that came out. It was, I would say it was probably in the hundreds.
So the 1960s were an interesting time in American history. What was happening in Fitchburg what were some of there were definitely things happening that were national that were affecting us, but
right.
What were some of the city issues that you felt needed some upheaval or
right.
some change?
Well, there was no difference in Fitchburg than it was nationally. There was concern about the Vietnam War. We had the Vietnam War protests going on. It was the start of the environmental movement back in the late 60s, and we had one of the most polluted river in the United States running through the river, and people today still remark about what color was it on a certain day, and they have memories of that and so forth. We had the same economic development challenges. Back then, we still had all the, we had the beginning of the transformation from private ownership to corporate ownership. And that's when that was the era when economically, the conglomerates were being developed. So the Fitchburg Paper Company became part of Litton Industries. The Weyerhaeuser Paper Company became, the Crocker Burbank Paper Company became part of Weyerhaeuser. And so we were beginning to see the transformation of local ownership and control to the corporations. And then known as Searstown opened, and that was the beginning of the end for Main Street, because Sears held a very prominent location on Main Street in Fitchburg, and when they pulled out, it started the decline of the urban centers.
So some of the things you put in place, like regional planning and having a highway that would connect Fitchburg and Worcester, do you feel that helped to mitigate some of those changes, or help shift it in a different direction?
Short term, no. Long term, I think it's critical, some of the stuff we did. Let's go back, let's go to the basics. We started the regional planning agency. The Massachusetts Regional Planning Agency was established, I believe, in 1969. And, the truth be told, the Nashua River, everybody thinks it was an environmental activity. The motivation to get it cleaned up, however, was economic. If we didn't comply with the state requirement of the Clean Water Act, and if we didn't work with the industries to make the treatment plants happen, it would have been easy for them to pull out. It was the best way to keep the industries going was to get the river cleaned up and so forth. The other thing is I got a letter, and I wish I kept it, but I think I gave it to Marion Stoddard. Marion was very involved, as you know. She was really the leader of the cleanup of the Nashua River. And the letter came to my office, and it was people think that, writing to a public official doesn't make any difference. Well, sometimes it does. It rings a bell, or it causes someone to look at something totally different. In essence, this letter said, Mr. Mayor, I recently came to your city to do business with the Simon Soren Steel Company. And as I crossed over the bridge on Bemis Road and looked down at the river, I said then and there that I would not do business with a city that felt so little of itself that it would allow a sewer to run through it. And I said, wow, what a whack on the side of the head. I shared that with the city councils, and I said, we have to do this because it's the right thing to do, and it's the image of the city is affected by the way we treat the environment. So that was the linchpin that really, gave us the economic incentive to clean up that river. And at the time, well, it doesn't talk like a big deal now because we throw around billions and trillions of dollars. But the total city indebtedness in that time might have been $12 million. And we had to put up a bond for $30 million to clean up to do the treatment plants. Now, admittedly, those got reimbursed, 80% of them got reimbursed, but we got another 10% if we were regional. Thus, let's create the regional planning thing and get it going. It would have happened eventually, but we expedited it because of the effort to clean up the Nashua River.
And regionalization also has other benefits too, because Monty Tech, you had other regional services as well that helped to mitigate.
I mean, I believe that regionalism is the way we had to go. That was the time when we eliminated a lot of the functions of county government, actually. But no, and out of that came the creation of the wastewater treatment, the solid waste disposal area in Westminster. And it was Fitchburg's waste going into Westminster, but we worked with the town, made it conducive to them, and here we are 52 years later, and it's still there. So, wow, some things, they last longer than buildings.
Right. Great. Well, and so that shows then that not only are you helping the economy, but you're also helping the environment as well.
Right.
And that there are cost benefits to both.
Oh, that was the if you ever look back at some of the clippings, Fitchburg's dump used to burn constantly. It used to be down by the airport, and there were fires in the dump and so forth, and it was a dump, literally. And so that was one issue that we really had to address.
Excellent.
And we addressed it regionally.
And like you said, it's still here
Still
today.
there.
Great. Now, just to go back a little bit, you were 25, 26 when you took office?
25.
25. Now, did you find being young was helpful, or did you find that there was bias against you because you were so green, or did that help?
25-year-olds don't really, worry about too many things. There were times. I mean, I was a little bit awkward at times. Here I was, giving directions to a department head group that was in many cases almost twice my age. Some of them had a hard time with that. But we worked together. We got it done. And I remember one of my favorite stories that I tell everybody when I was in business careers afterwards, that how important it is for people to be honest with the leadership. Because if you're not honest with them, we don't know what's going on. And the story I tell was we were trying to replace the West Fitchburg fire station. And so I looked around the city and I came up with an idea that we place it the lower part of Clegon, not too far from the existing Clegon station and so forth. And so I used to meet with my department heads on a weekly basis, and they're all sitting around the table and so forth. And I said, now look, I'm going to throw out an idea, and I want an honest feedback on it. And so I talked about, let's build a fire station there. And so I turned to Norm Fleckner, the fire chief, and I said, Norm, what do you think of this idea? He said to me, do you really want to know? I said, yeah, no. What do you think of this idea? I can't use the words he used, but he said, Mr. Mayor, that's the dumbest idea I've ever heard. And I said, I was taken back a little bit. I said, why is it so dumb, Norm? He said, because under your plan, all of our fire stations would be on one side of the river. And if we had a river situation, we couldn't get the apparatus to the other side. I said, thank you, Norm. That's why I asked the question.
So it's a good learning opportunity.
Good learning opportunity for everybody.
And
listen to the people that know what they're talking about.
Excellent. And then what was it like working you switched from city council to mayor, so what was your relationship like with the city council that you worked with? Did you find that it was a good...
I had no problems with the city council. I used to meet with them. Now, see, none of this stuff you can do anymore. You can't meet informally, privately. You can't do that. I mean, more decisions in the city of Fitchburg were made up at the Boulder Cafe's back room than were made in the city council chambers. That's where you really talked things through and found out where people were coming from and so forth. But all that is now illegal, so that strategy won't work.
with open meeting laws. And
open meeting laws, right.
Yes. Now, when you came in, did you know exactly what you wanted to accomplish? Did you find there were some problems you had seen from being city council, but as you spent 4 years in office, were there new things that came up that you wanted to see built? Were there things you wanted to repair? Were there new goals that came on the horizon?
Well, I didn't come into the mayor's job green because I had been on the city council.
Right.
So I knew that we had to do something about the river. The state had already put down the decree, and Camp Juster McKee was hired by the paper companies to do the preliminary study. So I knew we had to address the river issue. I also knew I had to do something involving the Rheingold School. It was coming in over budget, and we had to cut back the cost of the Rheingold School. As far as we had a lot of, they just passed the new state sanitary code, and because of that, a lot of the buildings on Mechanic Street were built by the Finnish population years ago, and they were multi-deckers and so forth, but they relied on the steam baths for bathing. And so most of those units didn't comply with the new sanitary code. So we had a whole bunch of abandoned buildings, and they were getting to the point where there were fire hazards, and we had to come up with resources to take them out, which we did. So, and you're sort of drawn by events too. I didn't intend to get involved in building a civic center and planetarium in 7 months, but that came to my door, and well, there was money for a ice arena, around $300,000. That's about where it was, and then Mr. Wallace approached me with a little bit more money and a new proposal. So, like I said, a lot of times events draw you in, and that's where you're going to spend your time and your energy. The interstate highway, in fact, this is another story I tell folks from my experience. You need to bring outsiders in, and this is probably a good message during the era of immigration concerns and so forth, because outsiders sometimes see things you don't see. And there were two things that outsiders brought to Fitchburg. One was Marion Stoddard. She saw the river for what it was, and she also knew that unless Fitchburg did something, it was going to be very difficult to get anybody else to do anything, because everybody else was hiding their pollution in our pollution. So she was the spark that really kind of created the movement to clean up that river. Secondly, and this I consider him to be an unsung hero, it's George Chatfield. George Chatfield came from New York. He was an executive with Procter & Gamble, and he bought WFGL, WFMP, which is the radio station, and he had Muzak. And I remember he said to me, Mr. Mayor, this city can't grow unless we have access to the markets of New York, and we need a highway. And he was known as Turnpike George. And he advocated for the Mass Turnpike Authority to build a spur up along the other side of Mount Wachusett, and it would come into Fitchburg, about somewhere in the West Fitchburg area. That didn't materialize, but through efforts, we were able to get the state and others to build Interstate I-190. And at the time, that was a major task, because it had to run through the reservoir, the watershed of the Wachusett Reservoir. It was probably one of the most expensive highways that was built at the time, and even today, if you go, you'll notice there's huge expanses where snow has to be piled, so it gets filtered before it goes into the reservoir. But building that road required constant lobbying and a whole bunch of other stuff. And it's an interesting story I tell folks, because when you look at the map, you'll see the Interstate I-190 is one of the few interstates that doesn't connect to an interstate.
Oh, that's
Normally, they have to connect to an interstate. And the way the Commonwealth was able to get the federal money was because they had a plan where the highway would actually fly over the tracks in Fitchburg, go up through Ashburnham, and eventually connect with the interstate up in Whitewater Junction. So therefore,
Oh my goodness.
this was the first phase of the road that everybody knew wasn't going to be built. But having the former governor of Massachusetts as Secretary of Transportation, it's amazing how things can happen.
Excellent. That's exciting. So actually, to go back to the Wallace Civic Center, so you said a little bit about how that came about, but what was the genesis of the idea to build the Wallace Civic Center?
It was George Wallace's idea. He wanted to do something other than just a library, and had given the former mayor, George Burke, the $300,000 to build an arena, and he created a, I guess it was a neighborhood facilities committee, and they looked around. The best that was going to come up was a Quonset hut with an ice arena in it, and nobody thought that's really what we wanted to do. So one day, George came into my office and he said, I'm going to give you another $700,000. Let's see what you can do with that. And he said, but there's a caveat. It has to be built in a year. So we only accepted his money on a couple of conditions. One is that the city would bear no responsibility for operating the facility. And we did a feasibility study. Could an ice arena sustain itself? And the feasibility study said, yes, it could. So we said to George, we accepted your gift. He said he would pay for the architectural firm. He hired it so that it was, he did it privately so that we didn't have any of the, we still have the competitive bidding laws in Massachusetts. So we didn't have any of that at that point. And we had to select a site, and we decided that there was a vacant lot, right? It was part of Coolidge Park. But that required a state legislative act in order to get it turned over. The fact that we wanted it to be a quasi-municipal operation, we had to get a special legislative act to create the Wallace Civic Center Foundation, I guess it was called. And then we had to put it out for bids. The big surprise came, and you had to know George Wallace. He wanted to do the eccentric and the different. And he called me up from, he lived most of the time in Florida during the winter, and he called me up and said, have I got a big surprise for you tomorrow? And so the day we were going to announce the project was all put together, he attached a planetarium to the building and gave another $1 million. So he gave almost $2.3 million, I think it was, but the same caveat, but you have to build it in 7 months. We never did a feasibility study on a planetarium because we didn't have time, and the planetarium became problematic, as everybody knows now. But the Bedonia brothers won the contract, and the contract, they won it because there was a requirement, this is I don't need to read a lot of details, but basically, because he wanted it built in 7 months, we put a stipulation in there would be a $10,000 a day fine or fee for every day you miss past the 7-month period. And Bedonia, when they put in their bid, said, we won't put any reserve for that. We'll build it. We'll get it done. And so they did. In fact, with a handshake, they started even before we had Wallace had cleared the money through his various accounts and so forth. So the city owned the building, but the foundation was going to operate the facility. And so as it's turned out, now we go through the age of time and the test of time. Now that the Fitchburg State University is operating the facility, they have a 99-year lease from the city of Fitchburg.
Right. Do you know why he wanted a planetarium? Was it?
Yeah, well, he wanted to honor his wife. His original plan was to build the planetarium as part of the library, but there wasn't enough room there. So I guess he had seen the planetarium and he got all excited about the planetarium. Of course, I didn't mention this earlier, the 60s was big space time.
Yes.
We had the man on the moon and all that type of stuff. So there was sort of a frenzy about space type of stuff. So he just wanted to be part of that activity, and so that's why he decided, well, we'll give you the money and we'll build a planetarium. And it was a beautiful planetarium. It was a great facility, and we had I flew down to Washington, and we got the first moon rock that was ever displayed in the United States was displayed here in Fitchburg.
How exciting.
It's interesting. And then another interesting thing that happened while I was mayor was the Prime Minister of Finland visited Fitchburg.
Oh my goodness.
A lot of people aren't aware of this, that the first Prime Minister of Finland is buried up at Forest Hill Cemetery. And so the President of Finland came, and we laid a wreath at the cemetery, and then we had a big Finnish festival down at Sima Park.
Wow. Oh, that's exciting.
A lot of good, fun stuff. It was an interesting time, and then the backdrop of all that, we decided we were going to go for the All-American City.
Yes.
And that was based on the fact that we had engaged youth in the community. I had a youth resource committee, and we had young high school students getting involved. One of them is still involved. He's involved here at the Historical Society. Bill McSheehy was on one of my first committees as a high school student. And so he based it on youth involvement, on what we were doing about the housing problem and rehabilitation of housing, and the cleanup of the Nashua River. We went to Portland, Oregon, made a presentation in front of George Gallup, and we were successful in bringing the All-American City back to Fitchburg.
And so that's what prompted a lot of the national attention you received when you were, I mean, there was some of that, but you were in Newsweek.
Being a kid mayor, I mean, now it's no big deal because, now the 18-year-old can vote and so forth. It's no big deal now, but back then, I was a kid mayor. That's basically what it was, and that had an interest. And back then, don't forget, we had the Iron Curtain and all the issues with the Soviet Union. So the Voice of America thought, oh, it'd be great to talk about how a young person can get elected in the United States. And so they interviewed me, and then all of a sudden we were getting stuff from all over the world. Did that all the press attention, did that distract from, I mean, you obviously still did quite a bit, but did you find that it ate up a lot of time having to answer reporters? No, look, I was a politician, that's not going to be a big problem. Attention isn't going to bother anybody. No,
Did it
didn't.
help? Did it help?
Oh yeah, obviously it did, because whenever I went anywhere, you had a little bit of celebrity status, so to speak. So, I got elected Secretary of the Mayor's Association, a whole bunch of other stuff. So, it helps because you're unique among the many that are out there. You have a little niche.
Do you think being a younger mayor helped to, or I mean, you mentioned Bill McSheehy, are there other people that were inspired by your campaigning and your office to go and become involved?
Oh yeah, I got quite a few actually. I had a lot of interns in my office. Andy Calmari from Leominster became Commissioner of Banks under the Dukakis administration. There were a few that got involved, and I still have people, not many anymore, unfortunately, come up to me and say, oh, I remember this because I was a kid when you canoed the Nashua River. And that's a story we probably should tell because we want to make sure from a historical standpoint we get it right. We had done all the work necessary to start the process of cleaning up the river, but it was still filthy. But we were going through the process of getting the bids put together for the construction of the two plants, one on the East Fitchburg and one on the West Fitchburg. And I got a call from the bond council in New York. He said, I would just want you to know that we have received word that the national movement, which was the first Earth Day, was going to descend upon Fitchburg as a showcase of what's wrong with the environment and so forth. And I said, this stinks. Here we are, we've done all this work. We're ahead of the game. I mean, we're one of the leaders in actually pushing this forward, and now we're going to get, banged up nationally because of this. And so we decided, the best way to do it is to attract attention. And so I had been a whitewater canoeist, so it wasn't any big deal to me to get into a canoe. So we just assembled the group, and the purpose was to show, A, call attention as the river is going to be cleaned, and B, it's going to have some recreational benefit once we get it all cleaned. And so we put into the river, and there had to be, I've seen estimates that there were 10,000 people lined the river. I swear half of them wanted to see me go in the river, but the river was crowded, and some were throwing flowers, some were throwing rocks. It was an interesting experience, but Marion Starter was in the front of the canoe, and I was in the bow, and I was in the stern, and we made it through. Most of the other folks got hung up on a few rocks here and there, but overall it was an interesting experience. Probably crazy. We didn't think much about what we were really getting into, but all of us came out of it healthy, and here I am 52 years later, so it didn't kill me.
Excellent. But and it raised awareness, and it helped too.
What I wanted to do, raise awareness of it, that this river is more than just a sewer running through the place. We can do something with this.
Was there a lot of public support for the cleanup? Did you get any pushback from?
No, there wasn't. Well, and part of it is, let's go back to the economics. So many people are employed by the paper companies. They didn't want to see the paper companies go under. They understood the economic impact of this thing. So, no, there was very little pushback. In fact, I can't recall of any pushback on that project.
Excellent. And to go once back to the Wallace Civic Center, when it completed within 7 months,
Right.
There was a big to-do opening.
It was a grand night in Fitchburg.
Yes.
It really was. It was an exciting, there was electricity in the air.
And it was more than Fitchburg who came, I'm assuming it was.
Well, we designed it, like we mentioned earlier, regionalism. I wanted to make sure that the board that's why we need legislation too, because the city had a building and we were going to let outsiders, so to speak, be involved in the management of it. So we built into it that 3 of the members of the board had to be from the region. So we took a regional approach to even how the Civic Center would be structured. But the opening night, which was a Sunday night, let me go back to why the Boston Pops. George he says, what are we going to do that's exciting, for the opening? And I said, well, George, I was invited down to Boston last year, which was '68, by Kevin White for the dedication of the Boston City Hall. That's when that was open. And I said, and the Boston Pops played in the vestibule there. I said, gee, maybe we should try to get the Boston Pops. Well, he thought that was a hell of an idea. And he really wanted to see that happen. So I said, see what you can do. And so we were able to get the Boston Pops, and it was the hottest ticket in town. I mean, Patriots tickets are nothing compared to what that ticket was all about. And so we had to play it for 2 nights. I think we were able to seat 4,800 people in the Civic Center for the event. So George hosted the board of the Civic Center up at the Fay Club. And then we had those executive coaches. And I remember we went up Mechanic Street, down John Fitch Highway, and I remember as we approached it, there were floodlights in the skies. I mean, it was like magnificent. Everybody was all excited. And as you know, George made arrangements so he could play his organ with the Boston Pops Orchestra, which he did.
Do you remember what he played?
No, I don't.
Oh, okay.
He played along with them, but I don't. He wasn't. They said soloist, but they helped him a little bit. But no, he was into it, and that was his moment. So good for him.
Great. So it sounds like it was quite the event, and definitely.
You're right. It was the event, and the whole week was an event. We had something going every single night because we were trying to show the various ways the Civic Center could be used. So it went from children's shows to rock and roll to country and western, and then on the following, it might have been Saturday or Sunday, I'm not sure now, we had the astronaut Dick Gordon come, and we had a actual model of the Apollo capsule, and we had the moon rock, and that's when we dedicated the planetarium. Senator Ed Brooke was involved, and so that was Space Night.
That's impressive. Now, do you have any other memorable concerts or events that you attended there in the years after?
Well, what happened was, for the first year, it was the place to go. So high school graduations were there, the firemen, policemen's balls were there, and so forth. Buddy Rich came and he played. But then the economics started to hit. We were trying to create a concert hall out of a hockey arena. I mean, let's be honest about it. And the bleacher seats really didn't lend themselves to that type of activity, and the cost of bringing in chairs and setting them up. So it became pretty obvious early on that was not going to be an economic activity, and so we should focus on the hockey, basically.
Well, that
ice skating and that type of stuff.
But there was a need, yes.
Great idea.
So you you left Fitchburg in 1971. You went to go work for
Congressman Dryden.
Yes.
Yep.
And what did you find there was obviously a difference, but what were some similarities of working for the federal government as working for a local government?
Well, you really don't, when you go to work for a congressman, you really don't, it's not really like working for the federal government. It's more of, working for the area that you just came from, the district, basically. And the it was important that I do it because at that time, we still weren't working under a federal Clean Water Act. That was enacted in the early 70s. And I remember Dryden asked me to testify. And so I testified in Congress to preserve what we had done here in Fitchburg so that the federal funding would be consistent and so forth. But no, Congress is a whole different animal. It's, my primary job was to connect with the cities and towns in the district and see what we could do to facilitate. I worked on creating the sewer system in Lancaster, the rebuilding of the MDC facility, which was all related to cleaning up the Nashua River and so forth. So it was just on a different stage.
Excellent. And why did you leave politics?
Development under the Dukakis administration. That was a tough time in the state government. There was a lot of corruption, there was a lot of problems. I was dealing with people I wasn't really comfortable dealing with, not within the Dukakis administration, but within the bureaucracy and so forth. And when Dukakis was defeated in the primary, I said, you know, enough of this. I don't need this anymore. And then, so I said, let's see if we can transfer the same type of skills, organizational skills, into the private setting.
Excellent. But that said, it is an election year, and when there are a lot of there's a lot of campaigning now, or whether it's this year or next year, if somebody were to come to you, a young wannabe office of somebody, mayor or congressman, what advice would you offer them for campaigning or for holding office?
Well, I would first tell them, make sure that you have a real job, because politics is a fickle business. You're in one day and you're out the other day. And basically it's just, be true to your values. Know what you're really all about. Know where to draw the line, and understand it's really not about you. It's about trying to make things better and to deal with issues as they come up. And then just give it your all.
Well, thank you. I appreciate this conversation, and thank you for sharing all your stories of Fitchburg.
I'm glad I still have enough memory to tell you about them all.
Excellent. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm Jessie Olson from the Fitchburg Historical Society. Thank you for watching. If you would like to find out more, please visit our website, fitchburghistoricalsociety.com.